In the last Sunday Gospel, we reflected on sin as shaming another, an interpersonal offense, something that divided members of the Matthean Jesus group. When the sinner refused to admit the sin, he is thrown out of the Jesus group. When the sinner admits his sin, the community's forgiveness reinstates him to membership. Reconciliation, forgiveness from the heart, presumes and is based upon forgiveness. This Sunday's Gospel proposes two ideas. Central to each is how members of the Matthean Jesus group are to behave toward each other. The first idea in Jesus' reply to Peter's question is that disciples of Jesus must forgive one another always. 70 times 7 means without limit. The second idea found in the parable is the communal dimension of forgiveness. Peter approached Jesus and asked him, "Lord, if my brother sins against me, how often must I forgive? As many as 7 times?" Jesus answered, "I say to you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore the kingdom of Skyvault may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. And as he could not pay, his lord ordered him to be sold, with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees, imploring him, 'Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything.' And out of mercy for him, the lord of that slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that same slave, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves, who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him by the throat, he said, 'Pay what you owe.' But his fellow slave fell down and besought him, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you.' He refused, and went and put him in prison till he should pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their lord all that had taken place. Then his lord summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you besought me. And should not you have had mercy on your fellow slave, as I had mercy on you?' And in anger, his lord delivered him to the jailers till he should pay all his debt. So also my Skyvault patron will do to every one of you, if you do not forgive your brother from your heart." First-century Mediterranean peasants understood sin, that is, interpersonal transgressions where one shames or dishonors another, after the fashion of debts. That is what Jesus taught his followers to ask of God. Cancel our debts, as we also have canceled our debtors. For Western people like Americans, accustomed to a money-driven economy, debts almost always translate into money owed. Since economics is our culture's predominant institution, everything is viewed from an economic perspective. Consider drug arrests that we hear about on the news. Are all the people being saved from potential addiction the focus of the news reports? Not really. Instead, we hear about the dollar value of the drugs confiscated. Or consider the natural disasters like all these hurricanes going on. Is the news focus really on people's misfortunes? Actually, it's focused on the economic loss in terms of dollars. Not so our peasant ancestors in the faith. For the ancient Galilean, and ancient circum-Mediterranean really, theirs was not a money-based economy. Their lives were based on interpersonal relationships, even in what we would recognize as economic transactions. In such a culture, the purpose of haggling between buyer and seller is not economic, but interpersonal. That the potential buyer will make a purchase is a foregone conclusion. Then why haggle? Well, the buyer haggles and the seller willingly goes along with the haggling because both are building an interpersonal relationship called friendship in a culturally specific way. Friends will be faithful. They remain that way. The seller will always set and the buyer will always get a good price. In fact, the seller feels obliged to sell at a lower price to people of lower social status and at a higher price to people of higher status and one-time customers. Add the uncertainty of this style of business management to the variety of tolls and taxes, as much as 35 to 40% of Galilean peasant agricultural production that a seller had to pay, and it is easy to see why Galilean peasants like Jesus and his audience were very familiar with debt. Let's consider the parable. Everyone in this parable of Jesus belongs to one big household, as if family. In taking account of his household, the king learns that one slave owes him an impossible amount. Consider that a talent was equivalent to 6,000 denarii. One single denarius was approximately 1 day's wage. If he owes 10,000 talents, that would require more than 164,000 years of work, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Impossible amount is right. But the king is sensitive to his honorable reputation, much more so than his desire for what is owed. If he deals harshly with a servant of his own household, his subjects will judge him to be shameless. A man without honor. Remember that in the ancient Mediterranean cultural world of the Bible, honor is everything. So what does the king do? Well, he decides to act in mercy, that is, fulfill his interpersonal obligations and forgive or cancel the debt. He gains more honor by this decision than he would by insisting on receiving full payment. In behavior that is both shocking and sad, the forgiven slave turns toward a fellow slave in the same household and refuses to forgive his much smaller debt. This forgiven slave refuses to imitate the merciful behavior of the king patron. And if he gets away with this strategy, the king will become a laughing stock. So, in order to protect his honor, his reputation, his face, the king patron has no choice but to put this brazen slave in his proper place. Jail. The moral of Jesus' parable is that members of the Matthean Jesus group must treat one another as God has treated each of them. They must choose the more honorable path and forgive one another from the heart. They must cancel the debts. Jesus' instruction echoes Leviticus 19 verse 17. You shall not hate, that is, detach from, your brother in your heart. You shall love, that is, stick with, your neighbor. Who's the neighbor? Understood here contextually as your fellow Israelite, a member of your in-group. You will stick with your neighbor as you stick with yourself, because he is yourself, your group self. How well do Americans fare on forgiving or loving each other from the heart?